So let's talk about that a little bit because, as you said, most of the problems we see there and throughout medicine are chronic disease, sometimes considered preventable
Yep.
disease.
Yep.
And therefore, if you say it's preventable, a lot of people say, well, then it isn't genetics, which some doctors have blamed. And basically, it's their go-to in conventional. A lot of patients will say this. It's like, we don't know why this happened. It's just your genes. Just live with
Yep.
it. Here's a pill. You'll take it for the rest of your life. Hopefully, symptoms won't get too bad. You'll die, someday, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the story there. And you just say, oh, it's my genes. Sucks
Yep.
for me. Right.
Yep.
And then you have the other side again that says, hey, like everything is environment. It's all about epigenetics and understanding that. How do you play into that and understanding where does this play a role in preventable chronic disease?
So the best way to speak to that is like literally my own personal example, right? Because I went through that exact same dilemma of, okay, so I'm told that I'm brown, so I have a genetic predisposition to heart disease, right? I live in Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto, and it's a very brown city, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, right? We have the biggest heart center in Canada. And we're told it's because that's where all the brown people live. So you need it. So when you look at the genetics of it, we actually have really good hearts. There's nothing wrong with the heart. So there's no direct, this gene equals a bad heart. But it is true that over and over and over again, that hospital is full of brown people with heart problems. Right? So there's some genetic thing it must be genetic because all your kids get it, all your uncles have it, right? So what's actually happening? So that's the first part of the pie that the genetic speaks to it, but now the functional medicine doctors say, no, there's more. What's the epigenetic? What's the trigger? So now you have to look at not literally measuring epigenetics, meaning looking at a blood biomarker, but what are the loads on the suboptimal genetics? So use me as an example. So as a South Asian, mix like Pakistani, Afghani, Indian, Persian, Mutt background, I have a suboptimal version of the endothelial lining. So the arteries around the heart, the inner lining, I have a not so good version. So it's more prone to inflammation. Doesn't mean I'm sick. I could live somewhere, beautiful life on a beach somewhere, never be sick, right? I live in Toronto, breathe in pollution, a lot of stress. I don't sleep properly. There's a reason why I might get inflamed here, right? So that's the trigger, the load. I still doesn't mean I have a heart disease. Now, layer on top of that of the main genes that instruct glutathionization, your detox systems, binding toxins in the blood, sending them to the liver to metabolize, I'm literally missing two of them. Forget about what version of the gene or what SNP, what variant, I don't even have the gene, right? And that you won't find that in your consumer testing, when it's what's called a copy number variation. It's a whole other test you have to run, right? So I'm literally missing those genes. So as I go golfing and breathing pesticides, as I go running downtown and I breathe in pollution, as I go eat food in a rush at a food court and I eat drying agents on bread and pesticides on the vegetables, etc., I can't clear this stuff genetically. So now it's in my system and it's free flowing in the bloodstream and it's causing damage, abrasions to this endothelial lining that was never designed to deal with toxic insults in the first place, and I have the weak version, right? Mm-hmm. So now what happens when you have inflammation here? All of a sudden, your body starts to deploy cholesterol to reduce the inflammation. That's the response. And that's the beginnings of cholesterolemia, the disease that gets sort of suppressed. So now for some people, it doesn't, again, it doesn't stop there. That it could end there where you just have this kind of elevated level, but you're not being treated. For me and my, brown brethren, right? We also don't deal with the inflammatory load well because our ancestors didn't eat beef. They ate goat, lamb, sheep. So the B12 that we're getting from the beef that we now eat as our primary bird meat, we don't even metabolize in our gut. We don't have the genes to instruct. And when I go take a B12 pill, how many, I call it Hindu vegetarians, are told by their doctors, you don't eat meat, so take B12. Well, guess what? I take it and I pee it out. I can only take what's called a pre-methylated, which, under the tongue, sublingual, or an IV. So that one thing, all of this stuff I talked about, okay, bad endothelial, not able to detox, inflammatory load. Even then, it doesn't mean I did get sick because my body should be able to fight the inflammation. I can't fight the fight because I'm not using the B12 that's in my environment. All I did was I started taking a sublingual B12 and an adenosine as opposed to methylcobalamin, like a very specific version. And I felt different. Like my brain was sharper. these kind of aches and pains I didn't even realize I had, like, were gone, didn't need as much sleep, etc. I have of course, I'm also supporting the detox, because what happens is when toxins meet the cholesterol hardens and gets deposited. And that's when that lipid transport process becomes more difficult. And that's the beginnings of that blockage that leads to a heart attack. So there's no genetic bad heart in any of this, right? There's 4 or 5 systems that are intersecting in one place that if you do all of these things wrong, that's why it takes until the age of 50 before you're actually sick, because you have to do it for that long, right? Your body is resilient to a fight, but eventually you're going to cross that threshold where you can't cope anymore. And that's why people end up in the hospital with heart. 50% of Americans are expected to have some kind of heart disease, right? It's mostly rooted in this poor endothelial, the wrong environmental, nutrition, lifestyle loads, and then the inability to clear those loads. It's that combination.